home and a new family in the United States are now left in limbo. Russian authorities have decided to ban American citizens from adopting children. They say the US is not safe for their kids, following the mistreatment of several Russian boys and girls. But the move is widely seen as a retaliation. It comes after Washington's recent decision to bar all Russian officials accused of human rights violations. Tit-for-tat politics, a heartbreaking situation for adoptive families and orphans. Sean Walker reports.
Rebecca Priest has been staying in this central Moscow hotel for 2 weeks now. After months of court proceedings, Priest came from the US to take home Gabriel, a young Russian boy with Down syndrome, who legally became her son last November.
This is a picture from last week when my husband and I went to visit him for the first time this trip. He's a very fun boy and full of life.
Before she could leave with Gabriel, the law forbidding adoption came into force. Rebecca had not received the documents she needed to leave the country in time.
Our judge, when we came, called us all back to court and told us she could not issue the decree, the final decree, because of this new law. To sit outside the courtroom and have our representative come out and tell us, "Not today," was her words, and your heart just drops, and it's devastating.
There are 20 parents like Rebecca waiting for the green light. For others who did not receive their court orders before the law was passed, adoptions have simply been cancelled.
There are around 500 children who already have become acquainted with their American adoptive parents and already had the hope of being adopted. These hopes have been dashed. For me, it's barbaric. There's no other word.
But the Kremlin has no intention of backtracking. The Russian authorities claim adoption has become a business and point to cases of violence against adopted children.
When I took office, the first case I dealt with was that of Artyom Savelyev, an orphan boy sent back to Russia by his American mother. She put him on a plane with a note saying simply, "I don't need him, take him back," as if he was a piece of clothing being returned. I don't see why we should condemn our children to abuse or death in the United States.
In 20 years, 19 Russian orphans have died as a result of abuse in the US. Isolated cases, but used by the Kremlin as political leverage. Eventually, Russia wants to end all international adoptions. Professionals in the childcare sector say this is bad news. Far away from Moscow, at this orphanage in Rostov region, there have only been 17 adoptions in the past 20 years.
Our orphanage is full of children and teenagers with difficult lives and broken destinies. Who will want these children? There are so many of them. I don't think Russia can cope with this problem on its own.
This year, fewer than 20,000 Russian families are candidates to adopt children. Not nearly enough for a country where there are almost 110,000 children in institutions waiting for adoption.
Now, for more on this story, I'm joined by Sean Walker in Moscow. Sean, since filming this story, have you heard from Rebecca Priest? What's going to happen to the child that she was meant to take home?
In fact, today she has another court hearing, and she's very much hoping that this will be the one that finally gives her that allowance to take home the child that she's been trying to adopt for several months now. There have been several of these court hearings so far. And she's hoping that today will be the decisive day. And what we've been hearing from the American embassy here in Moscow is that parents in a similar situation to Rebecca Priest, as soon as they get that court agreement, they're rushing to the embassy, rushing to get a visa for their adopted child and getting out of Russia as soon as they can.
It's a heartbreaking situation for those families. What solutions are there for them?
Well, of course, in the longer term, US families adopt from all over the world. There are a lot of adoptions from China, from Ethiopia and other African countries. But I think the people really in the worst situation are those American families who had begun the process before January the 1st this year. They traveled to Russia many times. Many of them had found children that they were ready to adopt. They'd met the children. The children themselves had met the families. And really everything was in place except that that the final step had not been started. And those are the people who now are in a situation where, while people like Rebecca Priest, who'd got just that little bit further along the way, are being allowed, or at least are hoping to be allowed, to get their children out and to complete the adoptions. Those people who were just a little bit further behind are the ones who are in the really heartbreaking situation.
But Sean, as we've heard in your report, it's going to be difficult for Russia to deal with these orphans if foreigners can no longer adopt. I mean, how are they going to cope?
Well, that's right. There's a huge number of orphans in Russia. There's also another 200,000 children who are in institutional care, even though their parents are still alive. And traditionally, it's not been a topic that's been very high on the agenda here. I was talking to the head of the Russian Down Syndrome Association a couple of days ago, and he said that perhaps one of the only positive things about this law is that it is forcing Russians to talk about this issue, that for the first time, orphans and children with disabilities are on the political agenda. But obviously it's quite a long way to go from talking about it, from it being an issue, to actually some sort of systematic change that would enable, first of all, the lives of these children in the institutions to be a little bit better, and second of all, for Russian families themselves to be more active in the adoption process.
Sean, over recent years, Russia and the US have had some pretty thorny issues to deal with. Has this adoption crisis strained relations even further, do you think?
Well, I think the adoption crisis is maybe a symptom rather than a cause of the strain in US-Russian relations at the moment. Russia, of course, was furious that the Americans introduced the Magnitsky Act late last year, which bans a number of Russian officials from traveling to the US. And this was really a response to that. As Vladimir Putin said in December, if people slap you around the face, you have to slap them back or they'll continue slapping you. And of course, this decision to use orphans, to use children as part of that response, as part of that retaliation, has been hugely controversial here. We've seen marches on the streets of Moscow. We've seen liberal commentators getting very angry about this issue. But really, the orphans issue is just one of a number of anti-American things and laws and rhetoric that we've seen in recent months. And I think there is a very difficult and strained period ahead for relations between Russia and the US.
Sean Walker, thank you very much for that. That was Focus. For more exclusive reports, tune in to Focus every day, same time, same place. All right, for those of you who have just joined us, here's a reminder of today's top stories.